Parents stole my $70,000 college fund. They didn't know they left behind a box worth $3,500,000. This story happened 8 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Every single detail. The kind of stuff that burns into your brain and never leaves. I need to tell you about my family first, because without that context, nothing else makes sense. My dad was a corporate manager, one of those guys who wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He worked for some big logistics firm, made good money, real good money, the kind that bought us a house in a nice suburb with a 3-car garage and a lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine. My mom, she was obsessed with appearances, what the neighbors thought, what the other moms at the country club whispered. Status was her drug. She lived for it. And then there was my brother Chris. Chris was 19 back then, 2 years older than me, and he was the golden child, the star, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. He had just gotten into an Ivy League school, one of those places where the acceptance rate is lower than your chances of winning the lottery. Finance major. Because of course he was. My parents talked about it constantly. At dinner, at breakfast, in the car, at family gatherings. Chris this, Chris that. Chris is going to be so successful. I was 17, a senior in high school, and I was the spare. Let me paint you a picture of how bad the favoritism was. Chris needed a car for college. Makes sense, right? So my parents bought him a brand new sedan. Nothing crazy expensive, but nice, clean, reliable, the kind of car that starts every time you turn the key. Me, I got handed down this beat-up Ford. Thing was older than I was. Passenger door didn't close right unless you slammed it twice. The paint was faded in patches. One headlight was dimmer than the other. And here's the kicker. They made me pay for half of it. Out of money I earned working weekend shifts at a hardware store. I remember standing in the driveway, looking at that rusty piece of junk, while Chris backed his shiny new car out of the garage. My dad clapped him on the shoulder, told him to drive safe. My mom took pictures. Nobody even looked at me. Dinner at our house was a special kind of torture. Every single night, it was the same routine. My parents would ask Chris about his day, his classes, his plans, his future. They hung on every word like he was delivering the Gettysburg Address. Then they turned to me, and without fail, my mom would find some way to compare us. Why couldn't I be more focused like Chris? Why was I wasting my time with stray dogs and wounded birds? When was I going to get serious about my future? I want to be a veterinarian. Had since I was a kid. But to them, that was a joke. A cute hobby. Not a real career. Not like finance. Not like law. Not like whatever golden path Chris was walking. The only person who ever got it was my grandfather, Walter. Grandpa Walter was my dad's father, but they hadn't spoken in years. Some old fight. My dad called him a failure. Said he wasted his life in the middle of nowhere, that he smelled like manure and had nothing to show for decades of work. That should tell you everything you need to know about my dad's values. Grandpa lived in this tiny town about 4 hours away. Population, maybe 2,000 on a good day. He ran a small veterinary practice. Nothing fancy. Just a one-man operation helping farmers with their livestock. Dogs, cats, horses, whatever needed help. I was the only one who visited him. Every summer since I was 12, I'd spend a few weeks at his place. He taught me everything. How to check an animal's vitals. How to calm a scared dog. How to see past the fur and fear and understand what was really wrong. He'd tell me stories while we worked about the animals he'd saved, the ones he couldn't. He never talked down to me, never made me feel small. In his letters, he used to mention this guy named Mr. Harris. His neighbor owned the local diner. Grandpa said he was one of the good ones, the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. Then Grandpa died. Heart attack. Quick. Probably didn't even hurt much. That's what I told myself anyway. The funeral was small. My dad didn't cry. Didn't even look sad. Just stood there with his arms crossed like he was waiting for a bus. My mom kept checking her phone. Chris looked bored. I was the only one who broke down. A week later, we met with the lawyer to go over the will. That's when things got interesting. Grandpa had left Chris and me each $70,000. College funds, set up in these special accounts called UTMA accounts. Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. Basically, the money was ours. But since I was still 17, not legally an adult yet, my dad was named as a custodian. He controlled the account until I turned 18. Chris was already 19. His money was his, free and clear. The lawyer also mentioned that I inherited Grandpa's house and his old veterinary office. It was set up through something called a living trust. My name only. My dad couldn't touch it, couldn't sell it, couldn't do anything with it. Grandpa had made sure of that. My dad laughed when he heard about the house. Actually laughed. Said it was a pile of junk in the middle of nowhere. That the land wasn't worth the property taxes. That I'd be lucky if it didn't collapse before I figured out what to do with it. My mom nodded along. Chris smirked. I didn't say anything. Just sat there feeling this weird mix of gratitude and grief. Grandpa had given me something. Something they couldn't take away. Or so I thought. Time moved forward. Chris went off to his fancy school. Came home for holidays with stories about his professors and internships and networking events. My parents ate it up. Every word. I kept my head down, worked my shifts, studied, filled out college applications for vet school programs. The guidance counselor told me my grades were good enough. My volunteer work at the animal shelter would help, but I needed that $70,000. Tuition wasn't cheap. Then came graduation, cap and gown, the whole ceremony. My parents showed up, took a few photos, left early because Chris had some event at his school they needed to drive to. I didn't care. I had bigger things to think about. A few weeks before graduation, my dad had called me into his office at home, told me we needed to handle some paperwork for my college fund. Standard procedure, he said, just insurance stuff. Making sure everything was in order for when I started school in the fall. He caught me right before I had to leave for graduation rehearsal. I was already running late, stressed about the ceremony, about my future. He used that, handed me a stack of forms, pointed to the signature lines, told me it was just a formality to release the funds for my enrollment. I barely glanced at them. Why would I? He was my dad. This was my education money, my future. I trusted him. I signed. Fast forward to late summer. I was getting ready to submit my enrollment deposit to the vet program I'd been accepted to. Nothing fancy. State school, but a solid program. I could make it work. I logged into the account to check the balance. Make sure everything was ready to transfer. The number on the screen didn't make sense. I stared at it, refreshed the page, logged out and logged back in. $1,500. That's all that was left. Not 70,000. Not even close. 1,500. My hand started shaking. I printed out the transaction history, went through it line by line. There, right there, a transfer. $68,500. Moved to another account. The date was 3 weeks ago, right after I'd signed those forms. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I found my dad in the living room, showed him the printout, asked him what happened, where the money went. He didn't even flinch, didn't try to sugarcoat it, just looked at me with this cold expression and told me the truth. They transferred my college fund to Chris. He needed it more. He was at a better school, a more important school, the kind of education that required serious investment. My veterinary program could wait, or I could get a job, work my way through. Plenty of people do it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him how he could do that. That money was mine. Grandpa left it to me, for my education, not Chris's. My dad's face hardened, told me I signed the authorization. It was legal, done, and that Chris's success was a family success, that I needed to think about the bigger picture. Here's the thing about custodial accounts. In theory, a custodian has what's called fiduciary duty. Fancy legal term that means they're supposed to act in your best interest. But in the real world, if a parent drains a UTMA account to pay for a sibling's Ivy League tuition, most judges see that as family benefit, the greater good. My lawyer told me later that fighting it would cost more than what was stolen. My own future was sacrificed on the altar of a legal loophole. My mom stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding along like he was making perfect sense. Chris walked into the room. He had the smug look on his face. Told me it was for the good of the family, that I'd understand someday, that this was an investment in all of us. Something inside me snapped, not in a violent way, but in a cold, clear way, like a switch flipped. I told my dad I wanted my money back, that what he did was theft, that I'd take it to court if I had to. He exploded, screamed at me, told me if I didn't like it, I could leave, that I was nothing without their support, that I'd crawl back begging for help within a month, that I should pack my stuff and get out of his house, go live in Grandpa's dump if I thought I was so smart. I looked him right in the eyes, didn't raise my voice, just said it calm and clear. You're wrong. You just freed me from the obligation of being your son. My mom gasped. Chris looked shocked. My dad's face turned red. But I was done. I'd spent 17 years being the spare, the afterthought, the one who didn't matter. And now they'd stolen my future to pad Chris's already cushy life. I went upstairs, threw clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, my phone charger, a few books. Didn't take long. I didn't own much worth keeping. I walked out the front door. My dad was yelling behind me, told me I'd be back within a week, that I couldn't make it on my own, that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't turn around, just kept walking to that beat-up Ford in the driveway, threw my bag in the passenger seat, started the engine. It coughed twice before catching. As I backed out, I could see them in the doorway, my dad still yelling, my mom looking embarrassed, Chris just standing there with his arms crossed. I put the car in drive and left. The first hour on the road was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. My jaw ached from clenching my teeth. I wasn't crying, wasn't angry anymore, just numb. I'd checked my bank account before I left, the personal one I'd set up for my job paychecks. $1,400. That was it. Most of what I'd earned over 2 years had gone to paying for half of this dying Ford. The rest went to gas, food, the basics. That's what I had to my name now. That, and a car that might not make it another 10,000 miles. The reality hit me somewhere around mile marker 70. I was 18 years old, homeless, with no plan, no college fund, no family to fall back on. I have to take out student loans. Big ones. The kind that follow you for decades. And I'd need a job, maybe 2 jobs, just to survive while going to school, if I could even still go to school. The sun started setting. The sky turned orange and purple. The kind of sunset Grandpa used to point out when we'd sit on his porch after a long day. He'd say something about how nature doesn't care about your problems. It just keeps being beautiful, whether you're paying attention or not. I missed him so much right then it physically hurt. The Ford started making a weird noise around mile marker 120. A grinding sound from somewhere under the hood. The temperature gauge crept higher. Not into the red yet, but close. I pulled off at a rest stop, popped the hood, stared at the engine like I had any idea what I was looking at. Steam hissed from somewhere near the radiator cap. Great, just great. The car was overheating. I let it sit for 20 minutes, bought a bottle of water from a vending machine, and poured it into the coolant reservoir. It wasn't enough. Not really, but it would have to do. I got back on the road, drove slower. The gauge stayed high but stable. The grinding noise didn't go away, but the engine kept running. Another hour passed. I took the exit for Grandpa's town. Population sign said 1,800 now. Even smaller than I remembered. The streets were empty, just a few streetlights casting yellow pools on the pavement. Everything was closed. The grocery store, the bank, the post office. This place shut down after dark. I turned onto the county road that led to Grandpa's property. The headlights cut through the darkness. Trees on both sides. Gravel crunching under the tires. Then I saw it. The house. Dark. Empty. Waiting. The Ford's engine was knocking now. Temperature gauge pinned in the red. I coasted into the driveway and killed the engine. Steam poured out from under the hood. I sat there in the driver's seat, hands still on the wheel. The cabin smelled like old vinyl and motor oil. The seats were cracked, foam poking through in places. This was it. This was my life now. I opened the door and stepped out into the night. The air was cooler here, cleaner. I could hear crickets. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door. The key was under the mat, right where Grandpa always kept it. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, hit the light switch. Nothing happened. Right. The power was probably shut off. I'd have to deal with that tomorrow. I pulled out my phone, used the flashlight, swept it around the room. And that's when I saw what they'd done. The house was gutted. That's the only word for it. Gutted, like something had come through and eaten everything worth taking. I stood in the doorway with my phone flashlight, cutting through the darkness. The beam swept across empty spaces where furniture used to be. Dust hung in the air. Thick, heavy, the kind that makes you taste grit on your tongue. Grandpa's dining table was gone. That beautiful oak table he'd refinish himself. The one where we used to sit and eat breakfast after morning rounds at the barn. Gone. The antique china cabinet. Empty. Just a frame bolted to the wall. All of Grandma's dishes. The silver service she brought from her mother's house. Vanished. I walked through the living room. My footsteps echoed on bare hardwood. The couch was gone. The armchair Grandpa loved. The TV. He'd saved up for a year to buy that flat screen. Wanted to watch nature documentaries in high definition. Said it helped him understand animal behavior better. They'd even taken the TV. My parents, Chris, they'd been here. Stripped the place like vultures picking at a carcass. The kitchen was worse. Cabinets hanging open. A few chip plates left behind. Not worth their time, I guess. The refrigerator was still here, but old, humming loud. Probably because nobody had defrosted it in months. I opened it. The smell hit me immediately. Sour milk. Something rotted in the back. I slammed it shut. Upstairs was the same story. Grandpa's bedroom. The bed frame remained. Just a frame. No mattress. No blankets. The dresser was gone. The photos that used to line the walls. All of it. Taken. They left me an empty shell. I went back downstairs. Sat on the floor in what used to be the living room. Put my head in my hands. Tried to process it. This was mine. Legally mine. Grandpa had made sure of that with the living trust. But my parents had swooped in anyway. Took everything that wasn't nailed down. Probably told themselves they deserved it. Compensation for raising the old man's worthless grandson. I didn't cry. Couldn't. I was too angry. Too tired. Too everything. I pulled out my phone. Checked the time. Almost midnight. I'd been on the road for 5 hours. My body ached. My eyes burned. I needed sleep, but there was no mattress. No blankets. Nothing. I went back to the Ford. Grabbed my duffel bag. Found an old sweatshirt inside. Balled it up as a pillow. Lay down on the hardwood floor and tried to sleep. The house creaked. Settled. Made noises I'd forgotten about. Outside, something rustled in the bushes. Probably a raccoon. I stared at the ceiling. At the water stain in the corner that had been there since I was 12. Grandpa always meant to fix that. Never got around to it. Morning came too early. Light streamed through the windows. No curtains to block it. Those were gone too. I sat up. My back screamed. Sleeping on hardwood at 18 shouldn't hurt this bad. But it did. I needed a plan. Food. Money. Work. The $1,400 in my account wouldn't last long. Maybe a month if I was careful. 2 weeks if I wasn't. I remembered Grandpa's letters. How he used to mention Mr. Harris, the diner owner. Good man. Fair employer. The diner was downtown. Maybe a 10-minute drive. I grabbed my keys. Walked out to the Ford. The engine turned over on the third try. Still overheated from last night. But it ran. Barely. I drove into town. The streets were quiet. A few pickup trucks. Some old sedans. Nobody drove new cars here. This was the kind of place where you kept a vehicle until it literally stopped moving. Harris's Diner sat on Main Street. Red brick. Faded sign. The kind of place that's been there since the 70s and never bothered updating. I parked. The Ford coughed out a plume of white smoke when I killed the engine. A guy walking past gave the car a look. The kind of look that says your vehicle is one breakdown away from the scrapyard. He wasn't wrong. I walked in. A bell chimed above the door. The inside was exactly what you'd expect. Vinyl booths. Linoleum floor. Counter with red stools. Smelled like bacon grease and coffee. Not the fancy kind. The kind that comes from a big metal pot that's been sitting since 6 a.m. An older guy stood behind the counter. Maybe 60. Bald on top. Thick mustache. Wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. He looked up. Studied me for a second. Then his expression changed. Recognition. You're Walter's grandson. Dan, right? Close enough. Most people got it wrong. Called me Dan instead of Denver. I'd stopped correcting people years ago. I nodded. Told him I'd just moved into Grandpa's place. That I was looking for work. Anything. I wasn't picky. Mr. Harris set down the rag. Leaned against the counter. Asked me if I had restaurant experience. I told him about the hardware store. How I'd worked stock and register for 2 years. How I was reliable. Showed up on time. Didn't complain. He thought about it. Looked me over again. Then told me he could use a dishwasher and busboy. Minimum wage plus tips. 10-hour shifts. 5 days a week. I took it. Didn't even hesitate. He told me to start tomorrow. 6 a.m. Bring my own apron if I had one. Otherwise, he'd provide it. I thanked him. Turned to leave. But he stopped me. Said Grandpa Walter was a good man. That he was sorry for my loss. That if I needed anything, I should ask. That kindness hit me harder than it should have. I nodded. Couldn't trust myself to speak. Walked out before I embarrassed myself. The first week was brutal. 10-hour shifts on your feet. Scrubbing pans. Hauling trash. Bussing tables. My legs ached by hour 3. By hour 7, I couldn't feel my feet anymore. By the end of the shift, I limped to the Ford like an old man. I'd go home. Collapse on that hardwood floor. Stare at the ceiling. Think about Chris. Chris in his dorm room. Probably memory foam mattress. Probably eating takeout with my money. Probably laughing with his rich friends about how he got away with it. The anger kept me going. Anger is a hell of a fuel. Burns clean. Burns hot. But anger alone doesn't pay bills. I needed more. Mr. Harris's daughter worked at the diner too. Sarah. She was my age. Maybe a year older. Studied biology at the community college. Worked shifts to help her dad out. She noticed me on day 3. Asked if I was Walter's grandson. I told her I was. She smiled. Said Grandpa used to bring injured animals to her dad's diner sometimes. That he'd sit in the back booth and bottle feed orphan kittens while eating pie. That everyone in town loved him. Sarah was easy to talk to. No judgment. No pity. Just genuine interest. She asked what I wanted to study. I told her vet school. She lit up. Started talking about anatomy classes. About dissection labs. About how hard it was but how worth it. We worked together most days. She'd bus tables. I'd wash dishes. We'd talk during the quiet moments. About animals. About college. About how we both ended up in this tiny town. Turns out she volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. Asked if I wanted to come along. I did. The shelter was small. Just a converted barn on the edge of town. Run by an old woman named Mrs. Chun who'd been rescuing animals for 30 years. Sarah introduced me. Mrs. Chun looked me up and down. Asked if I knew anything about animal care. I told her about Grandpa. About the summers I'd spent learning from him. How to check vitals. how to calm a scared dog, how to spot illness before it got bad. She handed me a leash, pointed to a kennel, told me to walk the German shepherd in the back. His name was Duke. He was aggressive with strangers. Duke wasn't aggressive. He was terrified. I could see it in his eyes. The way he pressed himself into the corner of the kennel. The way his ears were flat against his head. His pupils were dilated, wide. Classic fear response. I knelt down, didn't approach, didn't look him in the eyes. In the animal world, direct eye contact is a challenge, a threat. I stayed low, turned my body sideways, showed him I wasn't a danger. Grandpa always said that an animal's posture is a language. You just have to learn the alphabet. Duke's tail was tucked. His weight shifted back. He was ready to bolt if I made one wrong move. So I didn't move, just sat there, let him come to me. Took 15 minutes. But eventually, he crawled forward, sniffed my hand, let me clip the leash to his collar. Mrs. Chin watched the whole thing. When I brought Duke back, she nodded, told me I could volunteer whenever I wanted. So that became my life. Work at the diner, volunteer at the shelter, sleep on the hardwood floor. Repeat. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Sarah and I got closer. She'd come over to Grandpa's house, sometimes after our shifts. Help me clean. The place was a disaster. Months of dust. Cobwebs in every corner. The veterinary office attached to the house was even worse. Grandpa's office was frozen in time. Exam table in the center. Metal cabinets along the walls. Old equipment. Files everywhere. Sarah and I spent a Saturday going through it. Sorting. Throwing away expired medications. Organizing what was left. That's when we found the box. It was under a stack of old veterinary journals, pushed into the back corner of a cabinet. Metal, rusted the edges. Heavy. Sarah pulled it out, set it on the exam table. The contents shifted inside, made a dull clinking sound, not like pebbles on a beach. Heavier, more solid, like bone-hitting wood. We both stared at it. I opened the lid. Inside were stones. At least, that's what they looked like. Different sizes, different colors. Brown, gray, dark green, some smooth, some rough. They had a weird weight to them. Dense, compact, and they smelled, not awful, but distinct, organic, like dried leather mixed with something mineral. Sarah picked one up, turned it over in her hands, asked what they were. I had no idea. We kept digging through the office, found Grandpa's journals, leather-bound notebooks, years of entries, his handwriting, small, precise, detailing every case he'd worked. I flipped through the pages, found entries about the stones. Grandpa called them concretions, explained how animals sometimes swallow hair, mineral deposits, foreign objects, how these things accumulate in the stomach or intestines over years, compress, harden, form these dense masses. He'd been collecting them for 40 years. Every time he did surgery and found one, he kept it, like souvenirs, reminders of the complicated cases. But 2 of the stones in the box were different, larger, smoother, almost polished, dark, almost black. They had markings, faint, like someone had carved or etched them a long time ago. I found the entry about those, dated from decades ago, back when Grandpa was young, when he'd served as a military vet in Southeast Asia. The entry was longer, more detailed. He'd been stationed in Thailand, helped a local farmer whose prize goat was sick, rare breed, worth a fortune to the family. Grandpa saved it. The farmer was so grateful, he gave Grandpa 2 stones, family heirlooms, passed down for generations. Said they were good luck, protection. Grandpa had kept them separate from his collection, but over the years, they'd gotten mixed in with the others. I held one of the dark stones, felt the weight, the smoothness. Sarah asked if they were valuable. I laughed, told her they were stomach stones from dead animals. What could possibly be valuable about that? Honestly, I thought it was just a morbid hobby, a vet's version of a stamp collection. Grandpa had always been a little eccentric, keeping surgical specimens in a box. I'd almost tossed the whole thing in the trash earlier that day. Figured it was just medical waste nobody bothered to dispose properly. Thank God I didn't. She shrugged, said maybe they had sentimental value. That Grandpa clearly thought they were special. I put the stone back in the box, closed the lid. She was right. These were Grandpa's, his collection, his memories. I'd keep them, just like I'd kept everything else he'd left me. At least my parents hadn't found these. They'd probably looked at the box, saw weird rocks, decided they were worthless, left them behind. For once, their greed had worked in my favor. Sarah and I finished cleaning the office, stacked the journals on a shelf, put the box in a cabinet. Safe. We sat on the front porch afterward, drank water from the tap, watched the sun set over the fields. She asked me what I was going to do, long term, whether I'd still try for vet school. I told her the truth, that I'd have to take out massive student loans, work through school, maybe take a gap year to save up. But yeah, I'd still try, because what else was I going to do? She nodded, said she respected that. We sat in silence for a while. Comfortable, easy. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. That box of stones sat in the cabinet, forgotten, just another piece of Grandpa's life. I had no idea what they really were, no idea what they'd become. But that's a story for later. A few weeks into my new routine, Sarah invited me over to her place. Her dad had a small house on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but it had heat, running water, furniture, all the things I was learning to live without. She wanted to show me something, a documentary she'd found online for one of her biology classes, medieval medicine. She thought I'd find it interesting given Grandpa's work. I drove over in the Ford. Thing was still smoking, still overheating, but it got me there. Sarah's living room was comfortable. Worn couch, coffee table covered in textbooks. Her laptop sat open on the cushions. She pulled up the video. Some PBS special about the Tudor court, Henry VIII, poison, intrigue, the usual historical drama. I settled in. Figured it would be boring, just background noise while we hung out. Then a scene came on that made me sit up straight. A physician at court, demonstrating poison detection for the king. He held up a dark stone, smooth, polished, about the size of a golf ball, dropped it into a goblet of wine. The narrator explained that nobles in the 16th century believed these stones could detect arsenic, that if poison was present, the stone would change color, darken, sweat, give some sign. They called them bezoar stones. Sarah paused the video, looked at me, asked if that looked familiar. I thought about the box in Grandpa's office, the two large dark stones, the smooth ones with the faint markings. I told her it looked exactly like them. She thought I was joking, that I was seeing patterns where there weren't any. But I wasn't. The resemblance was too specific. The size, the color, even the texture. Sarah suggested we look it up, figure out if there was any connection. I thought it was crazy. Those were stomach stones from farm animals, not medieval artifacts. But she was already typing into Google, bezoar stones, history, medicine. The results that came up were insane. Turns out, bezoars were a real thing, not just movie props, not just folklore, real objects that sold for fortunes in the Renaissance. We read article after article, academic papers, museum descriptions, auction records from centuries ago. In the 1500s and 1600s, bezoar stones were worth more than their weight in gold. Kings paid thousands for them, kept them in their treasuries, set them in rings and amulets. Why? Because arsenic poisoning was the most common way to assassinate someone back then, and people genuinely believed these stones could save your life. Sarah, being a biology major, started looking into the science, whether there was any truth to it. She found research papers, modern chemistry studies. Turns out it wasn't complete superstition. Bezoars are made of compacted organic material, hair, plant fibers, minerals, layered over years inside an animal's digestive system. The structure contains phosphates, calcium compounds, other minerals. When you drop a bezoar into liquid containing arsenic trioxide, the poison that was most common back then, a chemical reaction occurs. The phosphates bind with the arsenic, create an insoluble precipitate. The stone literally pulls the poison out of the liquid. It's not magic, it's chemistry. I sat there staring at her laptop screen, reading about phosphate exchange, about how these stones actually worked, how they saved lives. Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement, started talking about how this was the intersection of history and science, how ancient people understood practical chemistry without understanding the theory. I was still stuck on one fact. These things sold for fortunes. We needed to know if Grandpa's stones were the real deal, or just modern farm animal concretions that happened to look similar. Sarah suggested we go to the library. They had historical archives, reference materials, maybe something that could help us identify them. The library was a small brick building near the town square, open until 8 on weekdays. We drove there in the Ford, brought the metal box with us. The stones clinked inside every time we hit a pothole. The librarian was an older woman named Mrs. Kowalski. She'd been running that library for 30 years, knew every book on every shelf. Sarah explained what we were looking for. Historical texts about bezoar stones, medical manuscripts, anything on medieval poison detection. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes lit up. She loved a good research challenge. She pulled out books we didn't even know existed, scanned pages from university databases, found auction catalogs from Sotheby's and Christie's going back decades. We spread everything out on a table in the back corner, started comparing. The descriptions matched. Size, color, texture, but that wasn't enough. Lots of stones could match a general description. Then Sarah found something. A paper about authenticating historical bezoars. It listed specific markers, tool marks from antique cutting techniques, mineral compositions unique to certain regions, patina patterns that developed over centuries. I opened the box, took out one of the large dark stones, held it under the library's fluorescent lights. There, faint lines along one edge, regular, precise, not natural formation. Someone had shaped this, carved it, probably hundreds of years ago. Sarah grabbed a magnifying glass from the reference desk. We examined the stone closer. The surface had this deep, almost oily sheen, not like modern polished rock, more like old ivory, aged, weathered, the kind of patina you can't fake. Mrs. Kowalski came over, asked what we'd found. I showed her the stone, explained about Grandpa, about how he'd served in Southeast Asia, how he'd gotten these as a gift from a local farmer. She studied it carefully, then told us about a professor she knew, used to teach at the state university, retired now, but he'd specialized in historical artifacts, particularly items from the Asian trade routes. She thought he might be able to help. We left the library with a name, Dr. Raymond Chun, and a phone number. Sarah called him the next day, explained the situation. He sounded skeptical at first, but when she described the stones in detail, his tone changed. He agreed to meet us. Mr. Harris offered to drive us, said he had business in the city anyway. It was a 2-hour trip. We loaded the box carefully into his truck. Dr. Chen's office was in an old brownstone near the university. Books everywhere, artifacts in glass cases. The walls were covered in framed certificates and photographs from archaeological digs. He was in his 70s, sharp eyes behind wireframe glasses, moved slowly but deliberately. We showed him the stones. He put on gloves, white cotton, handled them like they were made of glass, examined them under a jeweler's loupe, took photographs, made notes in a leather journal. The room was silent, except for his occasional hums of interest. After 20 minutes, he set the stones down, looked at us, asked where we got them. I told him the whole story. Grandpa, Vietnam, Thailand, the farmer's gift. Dr. Chen nodded slowly, said that made sense, that the stones were definitely authentic, probably Persian or Indian origin, 17th or 18th century. possibly older. He pointed out the tool marks, explained they were consistent with period metalworking techniques used to set bezoars in jewelry. One of the stones showed evidence of having been mounted in a ring or pendant at some point. Then he said something that made my heart stop. These were museum-quality specimens, extremely rare. In this condition, with this provenance, they could be worth significant money at auction. I asked him to define significant. He hesitated, said he couldn't give an exact number without a formal appraisal. But similar stones had sold at major auction houses for anywhere from several $100,000 to over $1 million each. Each! The room tilted. I sat down hard in one of his chairs. Sarah grabbed my arm, asked if I was okay. I wasn't. I was in shock. These stones, these weird stomach stones from Grandpa's collection, were worth millions. Plural. Dr. Chin said if we wanted to sell them, he could connect us with specialists. Christie's had a department for historical medical artifacts. Sotheby's, too. They'd need to do their own authentication, but he was confident they'd confirm his assessment. Mr. Harris asked about the process, how long it would take, what would cost. Dr. Chin explained, 3 to 6 months typically. Cataloging, provenance research, marketing to collectors. The auction houses would take a commission, usually around 15%. But for items like this, it was worth it. We drove back in silence. I stared out the window, watched the highway markers blur past. My entire life had just changed in one afternoon because of 2 stones that my parents had dismissed as garbage. They'd stolen my college fund, stripped Grandpa's house, left me with nothing but an empty building and a box of what they thought was trash. And that trash was worth more than everything they'd taken combined. The irony was so sharp it hurt. The next few months were a blur. Dr. Chin connected us with Christie's. They sent a specialist to authenticate the stones. She spent 2 days examining them, running tests, comparing them to their database of known bezoars. Her report came back glowing, confirmed everything Dr. Chin said, possibly even more valuable than his initial estimate given their exceptional preservation. Christie's wanted to feature them in their spring auction. Historical medical curiosities. They'd market them to museums, private collectors, Middle Eastern buyers who valued these objects for cultural reasons. The auction was in New York, Christie's main gallery. I'd never been anything like it before. Sarah came with me, Mr. Harris too. We wore the nicest clothes we owned, which wasn't saying much. But nobody seemed to care. The room was packed. Rich people, serious collectors, museum representatives, all there to bid on strange historical objects. When my lots came up, the energy shifted. The auctioneer described them, their history, their significance. Bidding started at $200,000. Within minutes, it hit $1 million. The first stone sold for $1.7 million. The second for $1.8. After taxes and commissions, I walked away with just over $2 million. $2 million. I sat in the hotel that night, stared at the bank confirmation on my phone. The numbers didn't feel real. Sarah was crying, happy tears, kept saying she couldn't believe it. Mr. Harris just shook his head, said Grandpa would have been proud. I didn't waste the money. First thing I did was apply to the best veterinary program I could get into. Cornell, top-ranked, expensive. I didn't care. I could afford it now. When the tuition bill came, I paid it in full. No loans, no payment plans. Just wrote the check and sent it off. I thought about Chris, how he'd burned through my $70,000 and his own money on whatever entitled rich kids spend it on. And here I was paying for my education with money my parents thought was garbage. The irony tasted sweet. Sarah applied for her graduate program, business management with a focus on medical practice administration. We talked about becoming partners, running a clinic together someday. It felt like a dream. 7 years went by. I finished vet school, did my residency, opened my own practice in Grandpa's old building, renovated the whole property, modern equipment, expanded surgical suite, hired staff. Sarah ran the business side, scheduling, finances, marketing. We were a perfect team. The practice grew. We added specialists, built a reputation, became one of the best animal hospitals in the region. I bought the car I dreamed about at 17. Top model, fully loaded, parked it in the driveway next to Sarah's SUV. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that beat-up Ford, the one that smoked and overheated, the one that barely got me to Grandpa's house that first night. I kept that Ford too, restored it, fixed the engine, new paint. It sat in the garage, a reminder of where I came from. But the money didn't erase what they did. I filed a lawsuit against my parents to recover the $70,000 they stole, not because I needed it. I didn't, but because it was the principle. Justice. My lawyer said I had a strong case. The paper trail was clear. The funds were designated for my education. They'd use them for Chris instead. The case was still grinding through the courts. These things take years. Then one afternoon, someone knocked on my office door. I was between appointments, reviewing lab results for a German shepherd with kidney issues. My receptionist told me there were people here to see me, said they claimed to be family. I had a bad feeling immediately. I walked out to the waiting room. My parents stood there, both of them. They looked old, worn. Dad's suit was cheap, off the rack, nothing like the tailored ones he used to wear. Mom's hair was gray, no expensive salon highlights. They didn't smell like success anymore. No expensive cologne, no high-end laundry detergent. Just a faint, stale scent of old clothes and discount soap. It was a smell of defeat. The same smell I'd lived with for months in that empty house. I knew it well. They looked broke. Dad asked if we could talk. Somewhere private. I led them to my office. Didn't offer them seats. Just stood there with my arms crossed. They told me about Chris. He dropped out of that fancy school, got into gambling, online poker, sports betting, lost everything. The remainder of his college fund, money they borrowed against their house, everything. They'd tried to help him, paid off debts, sent him to rehab. Nothing worked. He kept falling back into it. Now they were bankrupt, house foreclosed, retirement savings gone. They were living in a rented apartment, working retail jobs to survive. Mom started crying, said they needed help, just enough to get back on their feet, that we were family. That family helps family. The audacity. I let them finish, let them lay out their whole sob story. Then I reminded them of a few things. They stole $70,000 from me, money Grandpa left specifically for my education. They gave it to Chris, told me to figure out on my own. They stripped Grandpa's house, took everything of value, left me in an empty shell. They threw me out, told me I was nothing without their help. And now, after betting everything on their golden child and losing, they wanted me to bail them out. I told them no. Mom begged, said she was sorry, that they made mistakes, that everyone deserves a second chance. I told her she was right. Everyone does deserve a second chance. That's why I worked 3 jobs while going to school, why I slept on a hardwood floor, why I built this life from nothing. I'd given myself a second chance. They'd given me no choice. Dad brought up the lawsuit, the one I'd filed a year ago, for the $70,000. Said now that I was rich, I didn't need that money anymore, that I should drop it. That's when I understood. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. I looked him in the eyes, told him I wasn't dropping anything, not because I needed the $70,000. I had plenty, but because in this world, actions have consequences. When the court awarded me that money, and I wasn't keeping a cent of it. Every dollar was going to Mrs. Chen's animal shelter, as a donation in Grandpa's name. It would be their last contribution to my life, the only one that would actually do some good. Dad's face turned red, started to yell, told me I was selfish, ungrateful, that I owed them. I stayed calm, told him my real family was Sarah, Mr. Harris, Mrs. Chun at the shelter, the people who believed in me when I had nothing. They weren't my family, not anymore. I walked to the door, opened it, told them to leave. Mom tried one more time, grabbed my arm, said I'd regret this. I pulled away, told her the only thing I regretted was trusting them in the first place. They left. I watched them walk to their car. Some old sedan, dented, faded paint, like the Ford the first used to drive. Sarah came up behind me, put her hand on my shoulder, asked if I was okay. I nodded. I was better than okay. I went back to my office, sat at my desk. The metal box sat on the shelf behind me, the same box we'd found in Grandpa's cabinet all those years ago. Empty now, but I kept it as a reminder. Sometimes the trash other people throw away is the most valuable thing you'll ever find. And sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the one you were born into. I had both.